Our main character walks through the city at night, remembering a piece of advice from his father. The warning was clear and direct: never, ever get into debt with anyone. Because the moment you owe someone, everything starts to fall apart. It's like falling into a bottomless pit with no chance of ever getting out. With that, we see a room full of men gambling, one of them complaining that he's lost everything. Suddenly, a mysterious silhouette appears in the doorway of the establishment. Right after, our MC walks in and immediately calls out for Boss Hio. The man in the suit asks if the boss is around because he has some business to discuss with him. Our MC reveals he's there to collect a debt, remembering his father's words. Hearing this, the local goons don't like his tone and call him a psycho. However, Boss Hio tells his subordinate to shut his mouth and not be rude to their guest. So Hio apologizes to the collector, saying his boys aren't very well mannered. The MC ignores this and just asks if the payment money is ready. He starts calculating the debt, which was 100 million with 3% interest for 3 months. The total came to 109 million, and Hio, holding an axe, asks if the calculation is correct. Our MC corrects the amount, because with the added interest, the debt is more than 109 million. Hio tries to be slick and asks Kim Sang and to knock 270,000 won off the bill. The boss's goons let out a little smirk at the negotiation attempt. Kim Sang and refuses, saying he needs to be precise because even the smallest amount is still money. From that point on, Hio's expression changes, and he says he doesn't need to be friendly either. With that said, he lunges at the collector, swinging his tool with all his might. Hio tries to land a downward blow with the axe on our MC. The attack goes straight for the collector's head, but he simply dodges to the side. Hio is stunned by the dodge, and the young man takes the chance to counterattack. Our MC moves in incredibly fast and manages to land a punch right in the boss's face. The man in the coat goes flying backward from the force of the blow, completely losing his balance. The other gang members are in shock at the scene and start cussing out the collector. In a flash, Kim Sang and is already stepping on the fallen boss's chest and grabbing his axe. He then says he only lent the money because he was sure he could get it back. The goons are afraid of the armed collector, and one tells the others to stay back. Lying on the ground, Hio yells at his men to stop shaking, because he can't just croak without paying up. Without hesitation, our MC brings the axe down on the debtor's hand to send a message. With a cold look, Kim Sang and gets close to the man and tells him not to worry. Right after, he raises the tool and assures him he's not going to end his life there. The scene cuts to the front of a commercial building, home to the loan shark office. Inside, one of the employees asks another if the boss has collected everything yet. Just then, Kim Sang and walks in carrying 2 briefcases full of money and announces he's closed 4 cases. His colleague is impressed, comparing him to a legendary general returning from war. Our MC tells him to put 20% in the safe and deposit the rest in the bank. The guy in the tracksuit is thrilled and says that in 5 years, he's never seen a 100% collection rate. The other employees start sucking up to the collector, calling him the god of loans. Kim Sang and takes off his jacket, revealing a back covered in scars, and asks for a shirt. One of the guys hands him a clean shirt and mentions that the blood on the other one is still fresh. Our MC then asks if it isn't about time for the rookie to start doing some real work. With that, the colleague in the blue tracksuit assures him he was already planning an easy case for him. With that, the colleague in the tracksuit opens a folder and announces the rookie's first mission. He explains that the target is a young teacher with a debt of 10 million won. Our MC just stares at the situation in silence with a thoughtful look. The debtor's file shows a picture of a young woman with a very calm appearance. While the rookie gets excited about the task, Kim Sang and turns and starts to leave. The guy in the tracksuit finds it strange and asks where he's going, since he'd already ordered lunch. Kim Sang and tells them to eat without him, as he still has one last place to visit. Watching the boss leave, the employee comments on how he seems like a working machine. He emphasizes that in the 3 years he's known him, the only thing the guy cares about are the numbers. That said, our protagonist walks down the building stairs with a serious expression. The scene changes to a man begging while holding onto some insurance money. On his knees he pleads, saying that this is what his late wife's life was worth. The debtor begs for mercy, but the collector just coldly adjusts his tie. Kim Sang and thinks to himself that he only went there to collect what was owed to him. But he recalls that people always end up asking him to save them. In a moment of reflection, he sees himself holding the briefcases of money against a white background. The scene changes to a bloody landscape where the bags look like the heads of his victims. Back in reality, he informs the man that there are still 28 million left and he'll be back next week. The debtor, collapsed on the floor, curses him and yells that he'll rot in hell. With a look of pure hatred, the man repeats that the collector will burn for everything he's done. Our MC just listens in silence and coldly replies that he already knows that. Even so, he turns and says that even if he falls into hell, he'll still collect the debt. After leaving the place, the scene focuses on a window with Korean writing on it. Now at home, Kim sang and throws himself onto the sofa and starts to remember his difficult past. A memory surfaces, revealing that his father took his own life because of his debts. The image he has of his father is of a man who spent his days begging on the floor. The young protagonist watched it all from a distance and found the whole scene pathetic. From that moment on, something changed inside the boy who was watching everything. Soon after, the debt collectors turned and targeted him as their new mark. At only 15 years old, he didn't even know he could renounce the inheritance and ended up bowing to them. Realizing he would have the same pathetic life as his father, he made a drastic decision. The young man tells the loan shark that he can't pay the debt, but has another proposal. The boss is surprised and asks the kid to repeat what he just said. With a determined look, Kim sang, and offers to collect the debts for them instead. Back in the present, our MC analyzes the new debtor's file in the office. His gaze focuses on the details of the document with total concentration. The file shows the identity of the young teacher who will be his next target. Later, upon arriving at the office, one of his colleagues greets him excitedly. The guy in the blue tracksuit is confused to see the rookie standing there doing nothing. He immediately starts chewing out the rookie for not going to make the collection. The rookie defends himself, saying someone else went in his place and took the case. The scene then cuts to the front of a large school during the day. Inside, we see Kim sang and walking down the hall toward the teacher. He informs her that her debt is 10 million, with another 3 million in interest. Our MC gets closer and says directly that she needs to pay it all right now. Facing the young woman, he recalls his father's advice about never getting into debt. On the desk, we see the teacher's ID, which shows her name as Kim Yen. With that, our MC reveals that this was the only lesson their father left for them. The teacher is in shock and calls him brother, confirming the relationship between the two. Desperate, the woman tightly grips the sleeve of her own brother's jacket. Immediately after, she starts begging with tears in her eyes for him to save her. Kim sang and just stares at her with a cold look, showing no emotion. Suddenly, a student arrives and greets the teacher, interrupting the tense moment. The student says he's collected everyone's homework and asks if he can leave it on her desk. Then, the curious boy asks who the man is, since he's never seen him around before. Kim sang, and quickly makes up a story that he's an exchange teacher from another school. The student is a bit suspicious of the answer, but ends up accepting the explanation. The young man apologizes for interrupting their conversation, and says goodbye to the two teachers. As soon as the student leaves, the heavy atmosphere between the two siblings instantly returns. Our MC then tells her to meet him at the gate with the 13 million. He turns to leave and warns her not to even think about running as she tries to call him back. The teacher just stands there with a desperate look on her face, not knowing what to do. With her head down, the young woman seems to accept her tragic fate with no way out. As evening falls, we see the school gate as she just whispers her brother's name. Outside, Kim sang and waits patiently, smoking a cigarette on the sidewalk. At that moment, he remembers an old fight with his younger sister. She questioned him for becoming a loan shark, especially since their father was gone because of it. The girl screamed desperately, calling her brother crazy for choosing that path. Because of that, she told him to stay away, and said she didn't need a piece of trash like him for a brother. Lost in thought, he reflects that it's been 10 years since she disappeared from his life. With that, he remembers the people who begged him, including his own father, and now his own sister has stooped to the same pathetic state, asking to be saved. Kim sang and blows out a cloud of cigarette smoke while looking thoughtfully at the sky. Looking at his phone, our MC thinks that his sister should be coming out by now. Suddenly, something catches his attention, and his eyes go wide at what he sees. All of a sudden, a message notification pops up on our protagonist's phone. Looking at the screen, he sees it's a message from his sister, Kim Yen. The collector wonders what her excuse for not paying will be this time. But as he reads the message, the young man's expression completely changes, and his hand trembles. Our MC is in shock and freezes for a moment, not knowing what to do. He just stands there staring into space, processing his sister's words. A moment later, he drops his phone on the ground in anger and despair. Without a second thought, he starts running back to the school at full speed. Her message begins by saying she didn't expect to see him that day. She continues, saying that when she saw him in the hallway, she thought she was dreaming. The young woman apologizes for being so shameless and grabbing his arm. At that moment, some students look up and see the teacher on the edge of the roof. In the message, she confesses that she was vulnerable because she was about to jump. The teacher says she always thought loan sharks were the scariest thing in the world, but she realized she was wrong, because there are demons far worse than them. She reveals that monsters forced her to take out the loan from the people she feared the most. The young woman laments being so foolish, as her dream of being a teacher wasn't what she imagined. In her message, the teacher describes the classroom as a living hell. Because of this, she decided to free herself before her soul was completely crushed. She then apologizes for calling him trash and for not paying the debt. Our MC runs desperately as he remembers her parting words. The message ends with a thank you for worrying about her, and then she jumps. The collector sprints down the street, trying to get there in time to prevent the great tragedy. At that moment, he remembers when he realized he would have the same pathetic life as his father. Seeing his sister fall, he recalls the decision he made to change his own destiny. The choice was to become the one who collects instead of the one being collected from. A flashback shows the young man watching his father with a look of total contempt. In another memory, his little sister cries, asking why he suddenly disappeared. The scene reveals a young Kim Sang, and hugging his sister to protect her from everything. He asked her not to look at the horrible scene with their father, for her own good. In a flashback, the loan shark boss finds him interesting and asks why he's going so far. With tears in his eyes, the young man replies that if he doesn't pay the debt, his sister will fall into the abyss. Our MC screams in desperation because his little sister will have the same tragic fate as their father. Back in the present, Kim Sang and transfers 13 million to his sister's account. With that, the phone screen confirms the scheduled transfer of the money to Kim Yi-an. The scene then returns to the school, where the tragedy with his younger sister occurred. Walking down the hall, he remembers a night when his father gave him some advice. From there, he reaches the door of classroom 3-2 and stops in front of it. The memory continues with his father warning him never to get into debt. Inside the room, students are talking as his father's lesson echoes in his mind. He recalls that debts throw you into a bottomless pit from which you can't escape. For an instant, a dark silhouette is seen in the window of the classroom door, and so our MC enters the room, and the students stare at him with curiosity. In front of all those young people, he seems to be looking for something specific. He feels like a fool for not noticing anything, as the image of his sister falling comes to mind. He realizes that within that classroom, there was a true living hell. Our protagonist turns to the class and says it's a pleasure to meet them all. Right after, he announces that from that day forward, he will be their new teacher. He states that the delinquents right in front of him owe him a very large debt. With a smirk, the student with brown hair just stares at the new teacher, Kim Sang, and introduces himself as a debt collector and says he looks forward to working with them. The scene shifts to Congressman Park Man-cheol in a meeting, talking about 10 billion won. He's with another man and asks why they brought him to such a fancy place. President Wang Byung-hyun says that if it weren't for money, he wouldn't be there. The congressman gets nervous, but a goon knocks on the door and asks to interrupt. President Wang allows the man to enter, who comes into the room with an, "Hi, excuse me." With that, the goon approaches his boss and starts whispering something in his ear. The president's expression changes, and he says they need to leave immediately. He stands up, apologizing, and says to reschedule the meeting, leaving the other man confused. The politician notes that the food has arrived, but the president tells him to forget it and rushes out. President Wang leaves in a hurry, saying something unexpected came up and he has to go. The scene cuts to Kim Yi-an's wake with her photo on an altar of flowers. There, we see President Wang kneeling and paying his respects while our MC watches. With a serious look, Kim Sang and thanks the boss for attending the funeral. Wang tells him not to thank him and asks if he's even eating properly. Now at a restaurant, the boss laments the situation, saying the world has gone to heck. He comments that he thought the young man had cut ties with his sister, but blood is thicker than water. From there, Wang asks about the guys who tormented the young woman and if the police are investigating. Our MC just remains silent for a moment, looking down. Soon after, he reveals that he plans to find them all personally to handle it. The president seems to understand the intention behind those words about the young men. The image of a young man with a look of pure fury flashes for a brief moment. With that, the boss says that now those guys owe the collector a huge debt. Kim Sang and then asks his boss to pull some strings to make him a teacher. The president is shocked by the request and asks what he's thinking of doing. Our MC states that this is the most efficient way to collect his sister's debt. President Wang starts to laugh and says he raised him to be a true loan shark. With that, he agrees to help as placing someone in a school is a simple task. Kim Sang and thanks him, but the boss cuts him off and tells him not to forget something. With a serious look, the president warns him that this favor is also a debt to be paid. Our protagonist accepts the condition without hesitation and agrees to the new debt. Back at the school, the collector introduces himself to class 3-2. He announces that he'll be in charge of them, but thinks to himself that he doesn't know who the targets are yet. The reflection of the classroom appears in his glasses as he searches for the ones responsible for the tragedy. He observes them all carefully to find out who drove his sister to do that. One of the female students compliments him right away, saying the new teacher is very handsome. Another student comments on his physique and asks if he works out to be so strong. The brown-haired student he saw before greets him, calling him teacher Kim Sang, and cuts the introductions short and tells everyone to be quiet. He then announces that he won't be answering questions and tells them to get ready for the first lesson. The students complain about the teacher's attitude, one saying that even an AI has more social skills. But before leaving the room, our protagonist stops suddenly at the door. From there, he turns back to the class as if he has something to say. With a serious look, the collector asks a direct question to all the students. He asks if anyone there knows the reason why teacher Kim Yi and took her own life. Faced with everyone's silence, the young man understands that's a no and gives up waiting. And so, he finally leaves the classroom and continues on his way down the school hallway. The brown-haired student is intrigued and wonders why the new teacher did that. At that moment, he remembers his previous encounter with the man and the lie he told. Connecting the dots between the names Kim Ya and Kim Sang, and the young man gives a slight smirk. The scene cuts to the teacher's lounge, where our protagonist is talking with his colleagues. The other teachers say he's lucky because the students in class 3-2 are great. However, one of them reveals that the class is in chaos and 6 students are on medical leave. Outside, the collector reflects on why someone who got along with everyone would do that. He watches the students playing soccer and finds the whole situation very suspicious. In front of the school, our MC thinks that he can't find a single flaw in class 2. Class 3-2 is known as a model class and had a good relationship with his sister. Because of this, he checked the educational records in Kim Yi-an's class journals. But even so, the young man found no significant trace of bullying in the documents. He remembers his sister asking for help and wonders who exactly the demons were. Walking across the courtyard, he questions who the cruel demons she mentioned in her message could be. Suddenly, an angry voice shouting catches the attention of the collector passing by. He turns and sees some students in a corner and tells the aggressor to repeat what he just said. Hiding, he observes the scene and hears a young man cursing out a girl named Baek So Yin. Apparently, the young woman borrowed money, and the guys are there to collect the debt. The girl promised to pay in a week, but it's been 2 months and she still hasn't paid. From there, he remembers seeing that same girl at his sister's wake. Immediately after, the scene shows the student running desperately up a flight of stairs at night. She ends up bumping into the same man in the hat who was at the teacher's funeral. Seeing all this, our protagonist starts to piece together the puzzle. In a flashback, the same girl runs desperately through the funeral and passes by our protagonist. The collector observes the scene in silence and begins to understand her connection to his sister. The young student seemed completely devastated by the loss of teacher Yan. Back in the present, the bullies mock the girl, but the leader says he just wants his money back. Right after, the aggressor approaches and assures her that he'll pay the debt for the girl. She then asks if the amount was 500,000, and the boy confirms the sum. But without warning, the student slaps the young woman hard across the face, sending her flying to the side. With a cruel smile, he complains that she's making a scene over a small amount. On her knees, the girl begs for the money and asks for half back, but he calls her a loan shark. The aggressor says she was stupid to lend the money if she was going to hassle him about it later. The young man's expression shows pure contempt for his classmates' persistence. The girl stays on the ground, not knowing what to do, and seems defeated by the whole situation. With that, the guy in the suit approaches with a smile and asks if she needs the cash. With a bruised face, the young woman confirms to the student that she really needs the money. And so, the bully crouches down in front of her and says he has a proposal for her. The bully invites her to go out with him and his friends in a very suspicious way. With a bruised face, the young woman refuses the offer and assures him she will pay the debt. Park Dae-jin steps back and tells her to get ready while his friend mocks the situation. The scene changes to a restaurant where a man is yelling that the rent is 2 months late. The girl's mother begs for a few more days, as she has no way to pay the debt right now. At this, the woman reveals that the money from the cash register has simply disappeared. The student becomes desperate with a guilty look and wonders what she's going to do. In a flashback, we see that Park Dae-jin asked the girl for 500,000 won. At that time, the young woman explained to the aggressor that she didn't have that amount. The bully points to her mother's store and suggests she could get the money from there. With a sinister look, he pressures her and says she needs to do him a favor. Back in the present, the mother blames herself, and the daughter feels bad for causing it. The student thinks about telling the truth, but knows it won't solve the problem. Suddenly, the girl's phone buzzes, and she receives an unexpected notification. Park Dae-jin sent a message saying he withdrew the money and is asking her to go out. With the phone in her hand, the young woman is speechless at the message she just received. The scene cuts to the front of a karaoke bar at night, where the meeting was set. In front of room 3's door, Baek So Yin hesitates for a moment before knocking. Park Dae-jian opens the door and is surprised to see her there but pulls her inside. His friends mock the situation while the bully promises she'll have fun. The young woman warns that she's not there to hang out with them, and just wants her money back. The aggressor completely ignores her and puts his arm around her in a very weird way. With a sinister look, he says she knew very well what was going to happen there. He implies that she needs to do something to get the cash back. From that point, the young woman panics when she sees the guy taking off some of his clothes. She begs him to stop, but the other guys just watch the scene maliciously. The bully mocks her resistance and calls her a tsundere for playing hard to get. In tears, the girl repeats that she only came there to get her money back. Uncaring, he ignores her pleas and asks them to bring a bottle of water. Right after, he gets ready to pour water on her while his friends laugh. One of the bully's friends says she needs to put on a show if she wants the money. At this, he holds the girl and tells her to be still so he can get her body wet. The other guy gets ready to throw the water and yells that they're going to film a legendary video. Desperate, the student closes her eyes and just thinks of her former teacher's name. Suddenly, something happens, and the young woman's expression changes completely in an instant. The two aggressors also stand frozen, not understanding what's happening in the room. With that, Park Dae-jian looks toward the door of the place with a very serious expression on his face. A silhouette appears in the entrance, and a mysterious voice asks who the heck they are. Immediately after, our protagonist appears and tells the guys to let go of the girl's hand. The student is in shock and recognizes him instantly, remembering where she saw him. A flashback shows the young woman crying at teacher Yae-han's funeral next to him. The girl remembers the man at the wake and wonders what he's doing in that place. Park Dae-jian gets angry at the interruption and asks who he thinks he is to be giving orders. The collector just warns him that it's better to let her go, but the bully scoffs at the threat. At that moment, one of the students recognizes him as the new teacher from class 2 and tells the others. Losing his patience, Park Dae-jian shoves the girl away and tells her to get out of there for a second. Then he turns to the teacher and asks mockingly if he knows the girl. Our MC just stares at the situation in silence while the bully calls him her boyfriend. The aggressor then offers to go out with the girl if she's that desperate for money. Before he could finish his sentence, the collector lunges forward and lands a punch right in his face. With the force of the blow, the bully flies backward and falls to the ground in front of his friends. The impact of the attack was so strong that the guy didn't even have time to react or defend himself. The student is completely stunned by the scene and can't believe what just happened. Kim sang and turns to her and thanks her for being the only student at his sister's funeral. With a serious look, he stares at the situation and talks about the debt that was created in that moment. He assures the girl that he won't forget that debt so easily. The other bullies are scared, and our protagonist already turns to collect from them. He reminds them that they borrowed 500,000 won and didn't make a contract. Given that, the collector announces he'll calculate the interest at 30% per week. From there, he continues the calculation and says the debt increased with the 8 weeks of delay. Our MC reveals that the total amount of the debt is over 4 million won. With a bloody mouth, Park Dae-jian gets angry and shouts that he's not going to pay that amount. Kim sang and approaches and says a debt needs to be paid, but the bully complains about the amount. Our protagonist agrees that the amount doesn't make sense, but he has a plan in mind. With a cold look, he guarantees that from that moment on, everything will start to make sense. The scene cuts to the collector's colleagues in a car, one of them looking very thoughtful. He asks his partner why they were following those students around the city. Furthermore, he questions why the boss went after the young people like that. The other one gets annoyed and says that if the boss tells them to go somewhere, they just obey. The older guy admits he also doesn't know what's going on, but he's sure of one thing. With a serious look, he states that from the moment someone becomes the boss's target, that person is completely screwed, as our protagonist faces down the bullies. On the ground, Park Dae-jian gets up, his face full of anger and contempt. He yells, asking who this guy is to say whether or not they should pay their debts. Our MC introduces himself as the teacher in charge of class 3-2. The student is shocked to realize he's the teacher of her friend's class. The bullies get defiant, accusing him of assaulting students and extorting money. Our protagonist denies the accusation and says he's just settling the debts. He claims that correcting bad financial relationships is part of his duty as a teacher. The aggressor remembers that he threw the first punch and says they have nothing more to talk about. From there, the guys rush the collector, getting ready for a fight. Kim sang and realizes they'd rather fight than simply pay the debt. Without hesitation, he counters the attack with a powerful punch to one of the young men's faces. Immediately after, he hits the other aggressor with the same speed and precision. The group's leader doesn't escape either and takes a direct hit that leaves him dazed. In a few seconds, all 3 bullies are on the ground, and he calls them pathetic. The aggressor lies on the floor, not understanding what just happened to him and his friends. The student watches the whole scene with a look of pure surprise, not believing what she's seeing. Facing the boys, he warns that he'll give them one day to pay the debt, by 5 o'clock. With his foot on the leader's head, he warns that if the cash doesn't show up, things will get worse. With that, he presses his foot harder on the bully's head, who screams in pain. The collector guarantees that if the debt isn't paid, they'll wish they were in hell. Right after, our protagonist turns to the girl and confirms if her name is Baekso. Yeah. And so, he tells her not to just stand there and tells the young woman to leave the place. The student is a bit speechless at the teacher's cold attitude after everything. As he walks away, Baekso Yan calls him teacher and goes after the man. The young woman then thanks him for showing up there and saving her life. Kim sang and just tells her not to worry about it and to go home safely. Watching the teacher walk away, the young woman wonders who he really is. She remembers him talking about the debt and questions if that's why he helped her. From there, the pieces fall into place, and she realizes it's all too much of a coincidence. Because of this, the girl runs after him and asks if he came to find out the truth. Our protagonist stops walking and just listens to what she has to say in silence. Baekso Yan says he shouldn't have gotten involved, because she knows those guys well. She warns that they will come after him as Park Dae-jeon swears revenge on the ground. The young woman warns that if they report him, he'll be expelled from the school as soon as he gets back. Our protagonist just listens to her warning with a calm and serene expression, and so, he just says they'll see what happens and continues on his way. The scene cuts to the front of the school on a new school day, just like any other. Inside, some students are watching something on a phone and commenting on how insane the move is. Baekso Yan finds the situation strange because nothing happened and everything seems too normal. She thought the bullies would come after her too, but they haven't done anything. The girl wonders why Park Dae-jeon is sitting quietly in his corner doing nothing. Suddenly, one of the bully's friends gets up and walks toward the girl. Arriving at her desk, the boy calls her name with a very serious expression. The young woman turns around, already imagining the worst is about to happen to her. But he shows her his phone and reveals he's transferred 1,359,000. The boy explains that they split the 4 million debt among the 3 of them. That said, he tells her to inform the teacher that his part has been paid and runs off. Baekso Yan just stands there, not understanding anything that just happened in the classroom. Park Dae-jeon gets angry at his friend's attitude and calls him an idiot for giving in. A flashback shows the bully confronting the boy, calling him crazy for paying. He yells that his friend paid the debt just because he got beat up, and only his share at that. But the young man in the hoodie defends himself, saying the situation is much more serious than that. Immediately after, he reveals that their other friend received the same thing he did. The scene returns to the karaoke bar where Park Dae-jeon was planning to report the teacher. Suddenly, all of their phones start buzzing with a new notification. Looking at the screen, the boy in the hoodie has an expression of pure panic on his face. He can't believe what he's seeing, because the message was sent to all of them. Back in the present, the young man says his friend also saw the message and knows what it's about. The message contained all their personal data, from passwords to their parents' addresses. Park Dae-jeon realizes that this teacher is not normal, and they messed with the wrong guy. At that moment, the third friend starts transferring the money, and the leader becomes furious. The boy justifies himself, saying he needs to pay the debt before his father finds out everything. Feeling betrayed, the aggressor yells and calls his friends traitors for giving in. The friend apologizes and says he's going to pay too, because he doesn't want to get involved with the teacher. With that, the two walk away and warn Park Dae-jeon to pay up if he doesn't want problems. The scene cuts to classroom 3-6 where a lesson on economics is happening. Inside, the bully is desperate and wonders if he should really pay the debt. The problem is, he doesn't have a dime because he lost everything investing in crypto. Suddenly, our protagonist appears beside him and comments that he seems quite distracted. Then, the teacher directly reminds him that the payment deadline is almost up. With a cold look, the collector tells the student to save his useless thoughts for home. From there, the bully clenches his fist tightly, showing all his anger and frustration. Without a second thought, the boy storms out of the room and kicks the first trash can he sees. He's furious and wonders who this teacher is who appeared out of nowhere to ruin everything. At that moment, Yejin approaches and asks if he's having trouble with the new teacher. Park Dae-jeon asks how he knows, and the classmate says he heard it from his friends in the other class. At this, the bully scoffs and calls his former partners disloyal beggars. With a smirk, Yejin just calls his name to get his full attention. Yejin offers a way not to pay the debt and asks if his classmate wants to hear the proposal. Park Dae-jin is suspicious but seems interested in the solution to his problem. The scene cuts to the school's facade with an orange sky at the end of the afternoon. Outside, our protagonist observes the empty courtyard while waiting for the deadline to end. Suddenly, Baekso Yan appears and calls his name to talk to him. He turns around and asks the student if she managed to collect all the debts. The girl says that only Park Dae-jin is left and that her mother paid the rent thanks to him. At this, the young woman bows in a gesture of gratitude for all the help she received. Our protagonist says she doesn't need to thank him, as he was just paying what he owed. With a serious look, he pauses for a moment before continuing his sentence. Right after, the collector warns that there is still one debt left to be paid there. At that moment, Park Dae-jun appears, walking toward them with a smirk. The girl gets scared and Kim sang, and asks if the boy brought the payment money. The bully scoffs at the situation and asks if he really thought he was going to pay the debt. With a defiant posture, he says ironically that it would be impossible not to pay. A flashback shows Yejin suggesting that the bully make a deal with the teacher. The boy remembers that the teacher used personal information, and that he must have some on him too. With a malicious smile, Yejin reveals that he knows a few things about our protagonist. Back in the present, Park Dae-jin repeats the phrase and says he came there to propose a deal. Kim sang and just stares at him with a serious expression and asks what kind of deal. With a smirk, the aggressor confirms the proposal to the teacher of class 2. From there, he offers the truth about the collector's sister in exchange for his debt. Our protagonist listens to the offer in silence, without showing any emotion on his face. The bully then asks if the proposal isn't tempting enough for the teacher, but Kim sang and just coldly informs him that it's already past 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Park Dae-jin is left completely speechless, as the deadline for payment has passed. Immediately after, our protagonist starts walking toward the terrified debtor. The aggressor panics and repeats that he'll tell him the reason for Kim Y's passing. Without hesitation, the collector grabs the boy's neck and says he had already warned him. He reinforces that if the debt wasn't paid by 5, the situation would get very ugly. Park Dae-jin struggles as the teacher warns him that he'll wish he were in hell. Our protagonist maintains his cold gaze and doesn't show a hint of pity for the bully. The scene cuts to a flashback on a pier with a lighthouse illuminating the dark night. On a fishing boat, some men scream in pain and beg desperately for their lives. A young Kim sang and watches everything with a nervous expression, hearing the cries for help. At this, President Wong tells the boy to watch carefully, as this is a lesson. The boss encourages him to continue, and the young apprentice agrees to go along with the plan. He faces the victim, who begs for help and promises he'll pay all the money. The president tells the boy to look closely at the face of that man being grabbed by the goons. With that, the debtor screams in terror as the boss says he'll get used to this scene. The young protagonist just watches everything in silence, absorbing the harsh lesson. Back in the present, Kim sang and seems to cough a little but maintains his serious posture. Park Dae-jin continues to choke with an expression of pure terror on his face. The bully begs for help while the collector holds him tightly in front of everyone. Baekso Yan covers her mouth in shock and tells the teacher to stop it right now. Our protagonist just stares at him coldly as the bully begs to be saved. He finds the whole situation quite amusing and squeezes the boy's neck harder. Right after, he lets him go, and the bully falls to the ground, coughing and unable to breathe. With a dark look, the collector warns that the real collection hasn't even started yet. Park Dae-jin gets up, furious, and wonders why the teacher just left out of nowhere. He starts to wonder if the man will call his parents to collect the cash from them. But he reassures himself, since his mother is gone and his father is traveling for business overseas. As he approaches his car, he complains about messing with a piece of trash, not knowing who's waiting for him. Suddenly, one of Kim Sang-en's colleagues grabs him from behind and covers his mouth with a cloth. The goon says he's out of luck, because if his parents had paid, this wouldn't be necessary. That said, the man tells him to get some sleep, because he's going to need a lot of strength soon. From there, the bully passes out completely and lies unconscious in the back of the vehicle. Out of nowhere, a bucket of water is thrown in his face, and the boy wakes up with a huge start. A man asks why he's sleeping, and the young man realizes he's on a boat. The fisherman warns that if he wants to pay the debt, he better start working soon. Park Dae-jin is furious and asks where he is and why the place smells like rotten fish. At this, the boy realizes he's on a fishing boat in the middle of the ocean. The scene jumps forward 10 days, and the bully has become a sailor to pay his debt. But in the beginning, he tried to argue, saying he was just an innocent student. The fisherman didn't like his talk and grabbed him by the face with a look of pure hatred. Without hesitation, the man punched the bully hard, who fell to the ground instantly. With a knife, the fisherman warns that there are only 2 ways to get off that boat. The first was to work hard to pay the debt fairly and honestly. The second option was much more painful for the young debtor, who was panicking. He would get beaten up by the others, and then start working to pay off the debt. Because of this, the bully had no choice and started working for the first time in his life. Since he had no experience, the other fisherman taught him with lots of love and kicks. After 4 days, he learned to organize the nets and laments his crappy life. Time at sea passed very slowly, and the boy got seasick while the other man told him to work. Back at school, 10 days have passed, and some students notice something very strange outside. One of them asks if that's a zombie, while the other recognizes him as the bully from class 6. In front of everyone, Park Dae-jeon celebrates because his torture is finally over after everything. With that, the boy swears to himself that he will never borrow money again in his life. Furthermore, he promises that he will never set foot on that fishing boat again. Suddenly, our protagonist appears and informs him that he'll be going back to the boat next week. The bully is confused by the news and asks what the new teacher is talking about. From there, he gets defiant and yells that he worked for 10 days on that boat to pay the debt. The collector cuts him off and tells him not to jump to conclusions, as the debt hasn't been paid yet. He explains that the moment he got on the boat, the interest increased the debt to 1 million. With the interest from the 10 days, the total debt rose to over 2 million won. Our protagonist continues, explaining that the daily wage has a 100,000 deduction. Therefore, he still owes the debt collector over 1,500,000. Park Dae-jeon gets furious and says that's illegal, since he only borrowed 500,000. Kim sang, and asks if he thinks it's right not to pay debts and reminds him that he got him a job. The teacher also warns that without that job, the interest would have been much worse. With that, he announces that the next departure is in 4 days, and he'll take care of his school attendance. Park Dae-jeon is in shock and wonders if he'll have to go back to that boat again. The scene cuts to the office at night, and one of the employees calls our protagonist over to talk. The young man hands over an investigation report that the boss had asked him to do. He explains that they've investigated 10 of the 20 students in class 3-2 so far. Our protagonist then asks directly if they found anything strange. The colleague seems hesitant and says that the agency's requested confirmation on the results. It turns out they found no anomalies, and everything seems suspiciously clean. The guy in the floral shirt reinforces that the 10 students are practically model students at the school. And so, the collector asks if they followed the roll call order, and he confirms the method. At this, our protagonist realizes that the next on the list is the young man named Yejin. At that moment, the teacher's phone vibrates with a new notification that catches his attention. The message is from Park Dae-jeon, telling someone to bring the cash to a specific address. Seeing this, our protagonist tells his employee to go home, as he has business to attend to. The scene cuts to an arcade with claw machines, where the meeting was set. Inside, Park Dae-jeon complains and wonders if the teacher thinks he's a slave. With a look of pure hatred, he swears that with or without a debt, the teacher is going to pay. A flashback shows Yejin mocking his classmate, who gets angry at the lame joke. Desperate, the bully yells that he followed the boy's plan and got completely screwed in the process. Yejin stares at him and remembers that he already managed to get rid of a teacher once. At this, the boy agrees to help, and Park Dae-jeon is surprised by the response. He explains that last time, he was just testing the teacher to see his reaction, and so he reveals that the man is the older brother of teacher Kim Yi-en. Park Dae-jeon is in shock and realizes the situation has just gotten much more complicated. With a smirk, Yejin tells him to just lure the man to the agreed-upon location. Back in the present, the bully stands in the arcade, processing his classmate's plan. At that moment, the sound of footsteps approaches, and our protagonist appears at the entrance. Facing the debtor, the collector announces that he's brought the money to pay the debt for him. With a smirk, Park Dae-jeon scoffs and reveals he didn't bring the cash to the meeting. Our protagonist just stares at him and says he's much bolder than he imagined. Our protagonist then asks if the bully is sure about what he's doing right now. Immediately after, he warns that the boy doesn't seem to have enough people for a fight. Park Dae-jeon panics and tells his goons to come out of hiding right now. Surrounded by the men, the bully says that if he meets 2 demands, he'll let him go home. The first is that his debt be completely forgiven by the debt collector. The second is that our protagonist needs to leave the school and never come back. Kim sang and ignores the offer and asks who is responsible for setting up the ambush. At this, he points out that the bully doesn't have the brains to plan something like this. The boy gets scared and tells his goons to jump the teacher without a second thought. Desperate, he yells for the men to end the collector's life as quickly as possible. One of the goons attacks with a pipe, but our protagonist only wants to know who set it all up. The aggressor scoffs and says he's in no position to be asking questions and lunges at him. But the collector simply catches the pipe with one hand, stopping the attack effortlessly. From there, he grips the improvised weapon tightly and stares at the goon with a cold look. Without hesitation, our protagonist disarms the man and strikes back with all his strength. Park Dae, Jian is completely stunned by the scene and can't believe what he's seeing. Our protagonist approaches the fallen goon and asks one last time, with a dirty hand. He then slams the man's head into the machine's glass and demands to know who planned everything. With his face covered in blood, the collector repeats the question with a very threatening look. In front of the man on the floor, the teacher insists, wanting the answer to his question. He presses the goon against the broken glass and demands to know who is behind this. With a cold look, our protagonist is determined to find out who set everything up. The leader of the goons gets angry and asks why his men are just standing there scared. Immediately after, he yells and tells everyone to drag that sorry excuse for a man to him now. Kim sang and just faces the situation calmly with a look of pure contempt for them. In the blink of an eye, the arcade hallway turns into a real battlefield. The first goon who approaches gets punched so hard that his teeth go flying. Quickly, our protagonist takes down all the others with swift and precise strikes. With most of the men on the ground, the teacher faces the last one still standing. The remaining leader rushes at him with a bat, screaming insults at the collector. However, our protagonist dodges the blow with a quick movement, and the goon hits the glass. The aggressor is in shock, unable to understand how he missed the attack from so close. Right after, the collector retaliates, slamming the man's head hard against the machine. Seeing the scene, Park Dae-jian yells and tells his men to stop coming one at a time and attack together. The leader of the goons gets angry, because they can't lose to a guy in glasses with no weapons. He approaches a teddy bear on the floor and prepares to use it as a weapon. But our protagonist hits him in the face with the toy before he can react. With the impact of blow, the man falls to the ground, screaming in pain with a bloody face. On the other side, Park Dae-jian watches the last of his goons fall defeated. The bully is left wondering what just happened and how everything went so wrong. He then asks himself why the goons kept attacking instead of running away. From there, the young man questions why that man is winning the fight so easily. With his face covered in blood, our protagonist informs Park Dae-jian that the troublemakers are gone. At this, the bully panics and screams in fear, knowing he's the next target. Desperate, he repeats that they can't get caught no matter what, and he needs to run. Our protagonist slams his foot onto the bully's chest, throwing him to the arcade floor. On the ground, Park Dae-jian mutters that he needs to get up so he doesn't end up like the others. The boy remembers the unconscious goons and doesn't want to suffer the same tragic fate. Because of this, he gets up and runs off in desperation, not wanting to meet his end there. Kim sang and just watches him flee and thinks that it doesn't matter because he will understand the truth. The collector reflects that after they've seen the light, there's nowhere left for them to run. Desperate, the bully calls Yejin and tells him that the goons he hired lost. He explains that he barely escaped and begs for help because he'll be a goner if he's caught. On the other end of the line, Yejin just tells the boy to deposit 5 million won. The young man says this is the payment for the goons, and Park Dae-jian gets angry at the demand. Yejin warns that he never promised help for free, and using people comes at a high price. Park Dae-jian gets furious and yells that he's in this mess because of a previous debt. The classmate agrees that's a problem as mysterious men approach him. Yejin warns that from now on, his debt is with him and tells the boy to come quietly. To make matters worse, he explains the 45% annual interest and that it's compound interest. With a wicked smile, Yejin says he'll find him a good job to pay off the debt. Elsewhere, Yejin looks out over the city and says he just wanted to test things, but the result was unexpected. He's impressed by the fact that our protagonist took on 10 people by himself. With an excited look, the young man tells himself that this whole situation is going to be very fun. Back at the arcade, the leader of the goons gets up and calls the teacher a monster. Suddenly, a man with white hair appears and complains that they made a mess without him. The goon recognizes him as his team leader and asks how he got there so fast. The boss scoffs at the question and says he didn't expect the scene to be so bloody. He then asks the goon to tell him what happened, and the man talks about the kid from Solbat school. The goon explains that he agreed to take care of a teacher, but the boss only wants to know how much he got paid. Ashamed, the man reveals he only received 5 million won for the dirty job. The leader gets angry because not only did they accept a pittance, but they also got defeated. The goon tries to justify himself, saying that teacher isn't a normal person. But the boss ignores the excuse and says there's no way that could have actually happened. He finishes by saying that with a card from Good Capital, they couldn't have lost to a teacher. With a furious look, the boss warns that if the story leaks, he will be held responsible. He then asks where the teacher is and says he'll find him personally later. On the ground, the goon reveals that the man's name is Kim Sang, and the boss repeats it in surprise. With a sinister smile, the leader says, so the one responsible for everything is this Kim Sang-an guy. The scene cuts to the facade of the loan shark office at night after the commotion. Inside, our protagonist finds his colleague, and the young man is surprised to see him there. The young man explains that he can't go out alone yet, so he at least helps with the paperwork. Furthermore, he reveals that he wants to become a loan shark like the boss, and the collector becomes thoughtful. The employee praises him, calling him the #1 loan shark in Korea and his great role model. Our protagonist surprises his colleague by saying that loan sharks are just a bunch of scum. He continues, describing them as monsters who value money more than human life. Without hesitation, the collector states that they are trash who will definitely burn in hell. Taking off his jacket, he reveals his body full of scars and asks if he wants to be like that. The colleague agrees that their work is dirty but seems to have more to say on the matter. Even so, he assures him that his boss isn't that kind of trash and that he's different from the others. The colleague then reveals that he heard from one of the older guys about the boss's past. The story was that he gave up his own life to save his younger sister. Because of this, if the boss is trash, the boy says he doesn't mind being trash too. Our protagonist recalls that the youngest one there had forgotten his past. In a flashback, we see the young man begging on his knees in a hospital to two men. He was asking them to cover a surgery, and the collector realized the boy was just like him. Back in the present, he says he won't stop him from becoming trash, and the colleague is startled. With that, he announces that starting tomorrow, the boy can go out alone and earn 10%. But our protagonist makes him promise one thing before he starts working for real. The condition was that after paying for the surgery, he must leave the loan shark life behind. The young man is determined and promises he'll do his best to get out of that life. Now on the street, the collector thinks that Park Dae-jin definitely has an accomplice behind everything. He deduces that since the bully has no money, the accomplice isn't after cash. From there, he realizes they used the boy to test him and wonders why. With a hunch in mind, our protagonist walks to the classroom, thinking about the students. Our protagonist realizes that someone knows the reason his sister took her own life. With this, he understands that he doesn't need to hunt down the culprit, because they will reveal themselves. The closer he gets to the truth, the more the responsible party will have to expose themselves. The scene then cuts back to the facade of the loan shark office at night. Inside, his colleague is celebrating big time, because he's finally getting away from the boring tasks. At this, he starts thinking about what to wear, and that the main thing is to look scary. After a moment of thought, the boy has an idea of how to look more intimidating. The young man decides to wear glasses, just like the bosses, and thinks he looks awesome with the new look. In his room, he practices how he'll act and what he'll say during his first collection. But suddenly, the boss's silhouette appears in the doorway and informs him that he forgot his tie. The boy is happy and asks if the boss came back just to get the tie he left behind. Kim Sang-an just gives the boy a serious look without showing any reaction. Without another word, he turns his back and starts walking out of the office. Now on the street, our protagonist stops for a moment, hands in his pockets, lost in thought. His colleague is confused and wonders why he hasn't left for good yet. Suddenly, our protagonist hears a strange noise, and his expression changes instantly. Upon entering the office, he finds his younger colleague all bloody and unconscious. Kim Sang-an gets closer and notices the boy still has a pulse and was attacked with something heavy. At that moment, the shadow of a man with a hammer appears, and he realizes it was a blunt weapon. The aggressor moves quickly through the shelves to launch a surprise attack from behind. With the shadows on the floor, a voice says the whole situation was quite disappointing. The man accuses our protagonist of attacking the employees of Good Capital first. With a dirty hand, Kim Sang-an thinks that his opponent's pride could be a problem in the fight. The aggressor attacks with the hammer, but the collector dodges as the man seems to remember him. Right after, Choi Oh-kil appears and asks what kind of problem that would be. He says a loan shark can use a hammer and warns that this could become a company problem. Choi Oh-kil questions if the collector attacked his men without reason and if he seems like a maniac. A memory surfaces, showing President Wang saying the deal with the school was enough. In the memory, our protagonist thanks him, but the boss warns him to be very careful. With a serious look, President Wang makes it clear that this was his personal business. With that, our protagonist understands the situation is a problem and needs to solve it his own way. Choi Oh-kil gets ready to fight and says he has more than enough reason to finish him. Our protagonist scoffs, saying he ran all the way here just thinking about defeating him. The older man seems very excited about the fight, and a flashback about his past begins. In the memory, the aggressor calls him a rookie with a very sinister smile on his face. Then, Choi Oh-kil warns that he needs to become something truly scary. The scene shows the young protagonist tied up while the loan shark watches him closely. The older man complains that debtors only pay up when they feel like they're going to croak. He then compares him to the others and says the boy only pays because he doesn't want to meet his end. But right after, Choyo corrects himself and says his case is a little different from the others. He reveals that the young man's real fear is that his little sister will end up gone in the process. Seeing the boy grit his teeth, the man asks if he doesn't like his training method. Annoyed, he grabs his hammer and complains that the boss sent him a clumsy rookie. With a cruel smile, the aggressor warns that he'll start by breaking one of the young man's ribs. Back in the present, the loan shark complains that even rookies like him are now team leaders. Choyo faces our protagonist with a smile and gets ready for the fight. Right after, he charges with the hammer and says he's going to see just how good the boy has gotten. Our protagonist dodges the attack with a quick movement and prepares for combat. The aggressor is surprised by the speed and says the collector has improved a lot. He scoffs and comments that back in the day, the boy would already have his head split open on the floor. From there, the man realizes the teacher doesn't want the fight to escalate. Our protagonist then says he has a solution and asks the other to listen carefully. With that, he stumps his foot hard on the floor, getting his former trainer's attention. Choyo tells him to slam his head on the floor and apologize for what he did. With a smirk, the man asks the collector if he accepts the deal. But our protagonist refuses, because it was his men who attacked first. Because of this, he states with conviction that he will not apologize, no way. The aggressor becomes furious and yells that the collector always refuses to obey. With a look of pure hatred, he lunges forward, shouting that this really ticks him off. He complains that the boy never followed his orders, but always obeyed the others. At this, the aggressor yells that this is the perfect chance to teach him a lesson. He wants to show what happens when someone simply refuses his orders. Our protagonist tenses up for a moment but maintains his firm stance for the fight. The image of his injured colleague comes to mind, and he knows time is running out. Choyo scoffs and asks if he's really worried about a simple rookie. He tells the boy to focus on him and lunges with a powerful blow from his hammer. Our protagonist braces for the impact and carefully plans his next move. In the blink of an eye, he manages to grab the aggressor's weapon before being hit. With that, the collector uses the enemy's own hammer to powerfully counter the attack. An old lesson about facing blunt weapons comes to his mind at that moment. With a smile, Choyo compliments the boy and says he learned his lesson well. But the loan shark questions if that same trick will work against its own master. The older man gets annoyed by his look and calls him an unbearable wretch. Kim sang and replies that it's a relief, because the feeling between them is totally mutual. Right after, he charges with the hammer and prepares to hit the loan shark dead on. Choyo is stunned and wonders if the boy didn't dodge on purpose. He realizes the collector used his own teachings to trick him. Our protagonist says his orders were unacceptable, which is why he never accepted them. That said, he retaliates with a punch and says that's why he always refused his commands. The first order was to take the son of a woman who didn't pay her debt. With the force of the blow, the aggressor spits blood and is left completely dazed on the floor. The second order was to burn down shops to force the owners to delay their payments. With that, our protagonist lands another punch with all his might on the man's face. He then continues the sequence of blows with impressive speed. The memory reveals that the loan shark enjoyed the desperation of his innocent victims. Our protagonist finishes by saying that all of it disgusted him deeply. On the ground, the older man doesn't understand what happened and how the fight turned. He then remembers when he trained the young man and tortured him to be stronger. Now, the collector stands over him and stares with a look of superiority. Defeated, the aggressor curses him and asks if he thinks he's some kind of righteous and different loan shark. With a smirk, Choyo says they are the same thing, the same kind of trash. Our protagonist agrees with the man, but says there's a big difference between the two of them. He states with conviction that at least he doesn't take any pleasure in doing this job. That said, the collector says goodbye to the loan shark and starts walking out of the office. The aggressor gets furious seeing him pick up the rookie and asks if he's just going to leave him there. He warns that the fight isn't over, and if the collector wants to end it, he has to finish him. But our protagonist cuts him off and says he knows very well what it means to have a debt. From that moment on, the whole situation would change completely for the fallen aggressor. And so, the teacher informs him that from now on, the man owes him his own life. With that, he warns that the payment date will be the day he leaks what happened there. He also advises him not to get into trouble emotionally, like he did today. That said, our protagonist leaves the office and goes down the stairs with his injured colleague. Alone, Choyo realizes the boy has become an even crueler loan shark than he is. Even so, the older man starts to laugh and scoffs at what happened. Suddenly, the collector appears, and the aggressor says he was pretty emotional for someone who gave the warning. The scene cuts to the facade of Solbit University Hospital at night. Inside, we see the collector's colleague lying in a bed with his head bandaged. Slowly, the boy wakes up a bit confused and wonders where he is. Seeing the boss, he gets scared, but the teacher reassures him and tells him to rest. The rookie asks about the aggressor and Kim Sang and explains he was his former team leader. Our protagonist reveals that the attack was meant for him, and the colleague was just in the wrong place. The boss then asks why he was still there, and the boy says he was organizing the records. At this, the rookie remembers something and says he found a very strange student in the documents. He guarantees that this guy is not a common student, and the teacher becomes very interested. Back at school, we see our protagonist taking the student's roll call as usual. He continues calling out names as he approaches the door of classroom 3-2. In front of the class, the collector finally calls the name of the suspicious student, Yejun. With a smirk, the brown-haired young man raises his hand and answers the roll call. Our protagonist looks at the attendance list and repeats the boy's name with a serious look. Yejun is confused and asks if the teacher hadn't already called his name once. The scene flashes back to the hospital, and our protagonist remembers the conversation with his colleague. The boy reveals that all the investigation agencies refuse to look into one student. He explains that this only happens when the target of the investigation is very dangerous. At this, the colleague reveals that the student's name is Yejun, and the teacher stares at him. With this confirmation, our protagonist is sure that there's something wrong with the boy.